Okay, Radio TV Phono Nut here, and we have a Vanity Fair 78 RPM kitty phonograph, probably from the late 40s. You're about to see a repair video on it, not a recent repair video. It's one that I did a while back and just never released it. But anyway, this thing needs a home. I need $25 for it, plus shipping, United States only. That'll cover most of my investment in this. That's all I want out of it. And if nobody wants it, I'm probably going to part it out to fix more worthy models. Now, I've cleaned and lubricated the drive mechanism. It could stand a new idler wheel, but for something I'm asking $25 for, I'm not going to spend $35 or $40 on a new wheel. The same goes for the cartridge. The original crystal cartridge was dead, so I replaced it with an Astatic 89T cartridge that I salvaged from a junk school record player that the 78 side was still usable on. The amplifier's been recapped and serviced, and we have a new polarized line cord. And this is a single stage amplifier, so this is not going to be one with booming volume, but it will get loud enough for most personal listening. The case is in fair shape, not great, but fair. I've seen a lot worse and I've seen a lot better. Now, as far as the shipping goes, that might be the deal breaker on this. In fact, I just had a gentleman on one of the Facebook groups I'm in back out because shipping from Mississippi to California was $52 and some change for snail mail delivery, or I think it was $63 something for priority mail. Now, UPS and FedEx, they may be a bit cheaper, but it's been my experience that packages that I ship out to these 8 and 9 zip codes are usually expensive. Well, in today's world, shipping is expensive no matter where you ship anything to anymore. It's just gotten totally out of hand. So, I don't blame the gentleman on the Facebook group for backing out. I wouldn't have done that either. But at any rate, if anybody wants this, contact me some kind of way. I realize that's kind of difficult with YouTube being the way it is today, and I'll try to get you a shipping estimate, and you can decide if you want this thing or not. And if nobody wants it, it's probably going to get parted out to fix more worthwhile record players. But as you can hear, that idler wheel has a little dent in it. Get off of there. There we go. Now, I couldn't lower that value to like a .047 or a .022 and improve the high end, but it also might bring out the wear in the record. So on that note, I'm just going to leave it alone. That's the way it came from the factory, and we'll leave it at that. And as far as the post office and what they charge for shipping, I've determined that they're just trying to price themselves out of business. In fact, I see things on eBay all the time that I want until I see that shipping quote, and 9 times out of 10 it's U.S. Postal Service, and I end up backing out of the deal. I decide I don't want it that bad. But at any rate, if anybody wants this, it's for sale, $25 plus shipping, and hopefully somebody will want to fool with this thing. Now, as far as the tone control circuit, this is basically just a treble cut, and with a 0.1 microfarad capacitor, you pretty much go from higher end to pretty well muffled because the capacitor is dumping everything to ground. I could go in and change that capacitor to a lower value, and that would help that situation, but then it would also allow more high end to pass through, and that would bring out more wear on the records, and most 78s by this point are well worn anyway, especially the caliber of records that somebody would likely be playing on something like this. So we're going to leave that capacitor value alone. It came from the factory that way, and I'm not going to mess with it. Now, as far as the United States Postal Service and what they charge for shipping, I've about determined that they're just trying to price themselves out of business. In fact, I sometimes see things on eBay for a reasonable price that I'm interested in, and I see that shipping quote, which 9 times out of 10 is USPS priority mail, and that's the deal breaker for me. You know, that's the reason whenever I was selling a few things on eBay, I tried to go with a cheaper carrier like FedEx, which is generally cheaper, because a lot of these sellers apparently don't realize it, that they're cutting their nose off to spite their face when they're using the United States Postal Service, which is the highest price of all of them, and it's just running off their customers. But anyway, enough about that. If somebody wants this for $25 plus shipping, it's available, and if not, it's probably going to get chopped up, and the parts will end up going in other things that are more worthy. So if you want it, let me know. Now here's the repair video on it. Radio TV Phono Nut here, and if you grew up during the 70s and 80s, there's a good chance you had one of the cheap Vanity Fair kiddie record players. Now, what a lot of people don't realize, and myself didn't realize this until I actually saw one, is that the Vanity Fair brand of record players actually goes back to the late 40s, early 50s, when a lot of phonographs were 78 RPM only, such as this one right here. And, you know, it's built no better, no worse than any other similar record player from the time period. We have a decent little 5-inch speaker, our Alliance motor for the turntable, and a typical single-stage amplifier, a single tube plus the rectifier. In this case, we have a tube rectifier. Some of them used a selenium rectifier, and some of the last single-stage tube record players from the mid to late 60s, early 70s used a silicon diode. As you can see, not much to it, just an electrolytic filter capacitor and a tone capacitor here, and that's about it. This is a hot chassis job. As you can tell, one side of the AC line is connected directly to the chassis here. Somebody did replace the power cord, and I've had this thing so long that when I dug it out, I looked at it and I said, did I replace that power cord or did somebody else do it? Well, looking at it, I know I didn't do it, because had I replaced it, I would have tied a knot here to keep from pulling it out of the cabinet, or I would have used a cable clamp right here to help hold it in place. So we'll want to fix that. I really don't think this will be anything extraordinary as far as getting it going. Just change these two capacitors, wire the switch in the hot side of the line, fix the power cord orientation. Probably will have to replace the cartridge and do a general clean and lubrication on the drive mechanism, and we ought to be in business. Here's the Vanity Fair logo on the lid. And the case here, 3 of the 4 wooden mounting blocks had come loose because of old glue that had let go, so got them gluing back in place. Found these 2 nuts stuck to the speaker magnet. Those look like what might have held the volume and tone controls in place, or they could have just been something random that ended up in the bottom of this record player and made their way to the speaker magnet, but let's get the chassis in here to the workbench and do a little something to it and try to get this thing working again. Here's the cartridge, your typical flat metal crystal cartridge that probably tracks at about 50 grams. And since this is a single stage amplifier, it requires a rather high output cartridge, generally on the order of about 3 volts, but I found out in these 78 players you can replace the cartridge with an static 89T or more suitable one of the new production fan steel 911-S3s, which is a 78 RPM only version of an static 89T. The problem is finding a suitable cartridge mounting bracket because those are getting scarce. In fact, I'm getting low on them myself. I've got a few left that I saved out of classroom phonographs that I either modified or junked, so we'll put one of those in here. It won't be quite as loud as it would be with this type of cartridge, but at 1.3 volts output, it'll still be generally loud enough to give us ample listening volume, especially with post-war 78s that are often cut loud anyway. About the only other modern-day cartridge option would be one of the fan steel P51-3s, but quite frankly, the ones I've used, even though they worked, the construction quality left a lot to be desired, and those don't have quite as much output as the 911-S3 and in these single-stage amplifiers, unless you plan on adding an extra driver stage. They need all the kick they can. Alright, amps done. Both electrolytics replaced, the tone capacitor replaced, the polarized power cord rewired, so the hot side of the line is on the switch here, and the switch is in the hot side of the line. The cathode bias resistor was way out of tolerance, as was the screen grid dropping resistor for the output tube, so those got replaced. And now we have a working amplifier. 180 ohm cathode resistor, 340 ohms. Now 150 will work fine in that application. It's just likely that Vanity Fair got a good deal on 180 ohm floor sweeping resistors, since those are not very common, so that's what they went with. 15k ohm screen dropping resistor up to 22.5k, so that's out of tolerance. That wouldn't kill the record player, but it might cause some minor performance issues. Alright, the 0.1 microfarad treble cut capacitor, we'll call it that because that's basically all that circuit is. That capacitor and the tone control pot just form a treble cut circuit, and even at 20 volts you can see with the light on it's leaking like crazy. Alright, the 80 microfarad section of the filter, I'm not registering any value there. Let's see about the leakage. Yeah, at 200 volts, he took a little charge there, but this cap is basically open. Same story with the 30. No value registration. Let's check it. Yeah, it took a little charge and went off. Yeah, you see the light's taking a long time to, but yeah, that cap is actually very, very depleted, and I proved to you that everything I took out and changed was bad, so I didn't replace anything that was still functioning correctly. Alright, I replaced the cartridge with a plug-in one of these green 78 plug-in cartridges. And it gets pretty loud. I'll attach a cathode bypass capacitor to see if we can get a little more volume out of it. for the benefit of older 78s that are not cut as hot. Alright, I added a cathode bypass capacitor that gave us a little more bass and a little more gain, which is needed to compensate for that lower output cartridge. But yeah, the way we have this switch wired up, formerly we had a non-polarized power cord and the switch was in the neutral side of the line. That's generally the way they did it back then to help prevent hum and noise. Well, to meet safety standards today, or some facsimile of, we remove the switch from the neutral side of the line to the hot side of the line, and then we take our polarized power cord and connect the narrow blade hot side to the switch, and then the wide blade neutral directly to the chassis. So that way, assuming the power plug is plugged into an outlet that's wired correctly, the chassis is always at neutral, no matter if the switch is on or off. If you left the switch in the neutral side of the line and used a polarized power cord, and assuming it was plugged into an outlet that was wired correctly, your chassis would be at neutral when the unit was turned on. But when the unit is turned off, the chassis would be hot, because there would be a path from the hot side of the line, the power cord, through the series string tube filaments. And it's like they taught us in electronics. You know, you always have maximum voltage across an open circuit, so doing it the way I'm doing it, that'll ensure that the chassis is always at neutral, assuming it's plugged into an outlet that's wired correctly. Alright, that's pretty good. Now this cartridge is one that I took out of the one that's in there now is one that I took out of a school record player that the LP side was shot. The 78 side sounded a little raspy in the school record player, and I determined it was the cartridge. This is one of the new green ones. This record player is not something that I plan on keeping, and I'm not putting a $20 brand new cartridge in there for something that I'm going to sell for maybe 20 or 25 bucks, or should I say attempt to sell. When I'm in love with I mean, it still doesn't sound too terribly bad, so we're going to leave the old school record player cartridge in there. We're going to do a little general maintenance on the motor and drive mechanism, and then we're done with this. Okay, here we are with the platter removed, exposing the drive mechanism, and this spindle is in bad need of removal and relubrication. We'll clean all this up and give the idler wheel the sandpaper treatment and oil the motor, and then it's going somewhere else, I hope. Okay, we have the spindle cleaned and lubricated. It's running nice and smooth now, and I have the motor removed because we have to remove the motor to give us access to the idler wheel retainer clip. So we're going to take the wheel off and service it, and then we'll put the wheel back on and service the motor. Okay, the idler wheel has been removed and cleaned. It's still got a divot in it from where it rested on the motor shaft, probably decades, but we're not going to worry about that. Like I said, this is something that if I get rid of, it's going to be cheap, and I'm not spending a bunch of money on it just to end up losing it. So there you go. Okay, and I just removed the components from the bottom of the motor shaft that need to come off before we can get the motor apart. So the felt washer goes on the bottom, followed by the washer retainer clip, followed by the cooling fan, and then lastly the fan retainer clip on top. And when you're taking these motors apart, be careful, because there's often little spacer washers that are real easy to lose. And sometimes when trying to pull it apart, they'll get stuck, so you'll have to do a little light sanding on the very end of the shaft, and then it will usually pull free. Okay, motor's back in, our felt washer is in place and soaked in oil, and our retainer washer is there, so we'll put the fan back on, and then reinstall the fan retainer washer, and that'll be done. Alright, we're all back together and cleaned up a little bit except for reinstalling the platter, and then hopefully this thing will be good to go. Alright, here we are back together, and except for that little dent in the idler wheel, it's quiet. At least it's not making that gear grinding sound anymore. And like I said, it could stand a new cartridge, but for what I'm going to be letting this thing go for, I'm not putting a new cartridge in it. It plays with the old one, and if somebody wants to put a new cartridge in it, they spend $20 or $25 on one.
I know that someday you'll want me to want you.
But that's the old cartridge that sounds kind of raspy, just like it did in the other record player. And yes, just to be on the safe side, I pulled the speaker out to make sure the voice coil wasn't rubbing. It's fine, there's nothing wrong there. And there it is with the new cartridge, and that does sound a little bit better. And there's the old one again, you can tell the difference. Alright, just to be on the safe side, I went back in and checked my voltages. About 7 volts on the cathode, 120 on the plate, and about 112 on the screen. So that's good. That indicates we have no weak tubes. So I think we can put it all back together and do whatever with this thing. Alright, there we go.